Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review of Star Trek Lower Decks Season 1 Episode 6 Terminal Provocations. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Lower Decks, so I have to start with a spoiler warning for Lower Decks up to Season 1 Episode 6. If you haven't seen up to this point, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So, I thought this was a really good episode. Probably one of the better episodes of the season, but had a few issues with it. But I really liked it. Now, what I liked most about this episode is the structure. I think this is exactly the kind of structure, well, maybe not exactly, because I'm really sick of the whole Boimler and Mariner go off in one adventure, and then Tendi and Rutherford go off in another adventure. That's something I railed about last week, and they're still doing it. So, not that part of it. So that part of the structure I wasn't a fan of because I'm sick of it. Come on. But the rest of it I thought was perfect because the structure, that is, because I thought this was the best use of the senior officers. In fact, this is kind of what I would imagine the show to be, and I think it's beautiful the way they use them compared to the lower deckers. Now, what I mean by that is, so in some of the earlier episodes, the senior officers kept interacting with the lower deckers. Now, it's somewhat excusable because Mariner is Captain Freeman's daughter, which is a plot line I didn't like in the first place, but it's somewhat excusable. But still, it kind of, I didn't think that's what the structure of the show would be, because then it becomes, why is the senior officer spending so much time with these specific lower deckers? And if they spend so much time with the senior officers, they're not really lower deckers, then it singles them out as sort of main important members of this crew, and the whole, that which goes against the whole point of the show, which the whole point of the show is that they're not important, that they're minor characters. But then you had a structure of last week's episode where the senior officers had their own plot, but it had absolutely nothing to do with what the lower deckers were up to. So I didn't like that either, because it kind of seemed like it was kind of pointless that they just threw in the senior officers are doing their thing, the lower deckers are doing their thing, and never the twain should meet. Then you might be like, well, I don't understand. What do you want? Well, what I want is what they did in this episode, where the senior officers are doing their own thing, the lower deckers are doing their own thing, even though they don't directly meet. Well, they kind of do at the end of the episode. For the most part, they don't, but what they're doing is directly related and directly tied in to each other. Well, maybe not directly, but they find ways. Like, so the senior officers got their thing going with this ship, which I actually thought was a pretty interesting storyline, with this ship that of pirates or scavengers or someone, not really pirates, but they're trying to salvage this Federation ship that's really old, and of course Captain Freeman says they don't have right to, but they don't care, and they keep doing it anyway, and eventually they get so pissed off they just start throwing shit at the Cerritos, but Freeman refuses to attack because it's Starfleet. They're not supposed to just fire on, they're trying to find a diplomatic solution, but nothing seems to work. But what happens, even though this seems like really separate to what the lower deckers are doing, because what the lower deckers are doing, we got two plots, one with Mariner and Boromir, and one with Tendi and fucking Rutherford. I'm really, come on guys, I'm really sick of this. I really hope they start splitting things up. I hope this isn't the entire show, because I don't know, anyway. Anyway, so we got a plot with the lower deckers. One is with Mariner and Bulmer, where I can't even remember that guy's dude. The dude's name. God, off the top of my head. But anyway, they had the plot was with him where he fucked up and he tried to make himself smart, and he ended up implanting his personality into this computer core that went all crazy. And it's an over the top plot. I like it for a comedy show. I think it really worked. But it also had a subplot with Tendi and Rutherford being hunted on a holodeck by an evil talking badge, which is perfect for a comedy show. But, well, the talking badge thing never really tied into it. But the plot with Mariner and, the warp core, that actually ended up solving the issue that the senior officers were facing, because the senior officers were like, all right, we've had enough, let's attack the ship, but their weapons were down and they were screwed, and they're like, oh my god, we're gonna have to evacuate the ship. They thought they were totally screwed, but then the lower deckers saved them, and of course there's a sense of irony and humor to it, because they didn't intend to save them. They intended to just throw this thing out the airlock so they wouldn't get in trouble, and then it ended up going to the alien ship and attacking it. And they had that line, which I didn't remember from the trailer, where Bulmer was like, oh my god, we're so getting fired for this. But in fact, what they end up doing is saving the ship unintentionally. And that is what I mean by the perfect use of this format with the senior officers and the lower deckers, is that the lower deckers are doing their own thing, and they are completely oblivious to what the senior officers are doing, but what they do ends up having an impact on what's going on in the senior. Because this is what feels like a true lower decks experience to me, is that you have these junior officers who are just doing their own thing and don't really care about what's going on with the senior officers, and then it has the senior officers doing their own thing. They don't really care what's going on with the junior officers, so it's like things going on at the same time, which is what I really wanted out of this show. Now you could say, oh, that's what they did last week, but last week the problem is that the two plots ended up having absolutely nothing to do with each other, and that bothered me. But this week, of course, they directly intertwine that. It's clever. I think that's really clever, and I really liked how that worked out. Now, let me get into the senior officer's plot first, which I gotta say, and this wasn't the main plot, it was just kind of something to the side. I gotta say, I love the use of the security chief, blanking on his name, Bajoran guy, in this episode, because it's like the perfect parody of Worf. Because obviously this is over top, and no real security chief would be like, come on, let me blow it up. But that's stuff what we used to joke about as Star Trek fans all the time, about Worf, about Next Generation, how Worf is we'd always joke that Worf would be like, oh, just let me blow it up, I want to fire, let me fire, oh, I want to fire, which of course he never actually did that, because that would be over the top. But this whole show is about being over the top and comedic, so they sort of portrayed that with this character, with this security officer being like the one, can I fire at the warp core? Come on, damn it, let me fire at the warp core. Like, that was perfect. That was like perfect humor, really inside like Star Trek humor, reflecting on what we feel characters like Worf were thinking, but never actually outright said. So I love that part of it, and it was also good that Captain Freeman's like, no, we're Starfleet, we have to find the diplomatic solution. And he's like, oh, come on. Oh, that was just perfect. And okay, so let me get into the. I guess I'll get to the Tendi and what's this Rutherford plot, which this is okay. Like, it didn't really bother me. I didn't have an issue with it like I did with last week's, but I don't think it was as good as, say, something like the Ascension storyline, which I think was great. But anyway, this one was okay. Where it was funny. There's a humor aspect, of course, when they go to the holodeck. And it's obvious, like, the talking badge is sort of a fill-in to whatever kind of talking symbols we have on tutorials in present day, and sort of a take on that. And of course, they were kind of hinting early on, like, I knew it was going to end up trying to kill them, which is it's a funny scenario where you have this badgie going, I'm going to rip your arms out. Like, it was humorous. But here's the issue I had with this. It's a trapped in the holodeck trope, where the safeties conveniently go off, and yet the whole entire ship is oblivious to this. Now, and here's the thing about that. That is a very tired trope. I talked about it on my other Star Trek reviews, that it's lazy writing because they want stakes, so they make the holodeck into this killing machine, which in practical terms is impractical, because they wouldn't have this entertainment system that's there for recreation if it's gonna constantly break down and try to kill people. Like, they wouldn't do that. That doesn't make sense. Now, here's the thing about that. You might be like, well, Mark, this is just a comedy. But here's the thing. If it was a comedy, it would be making fun of that trope. In fact, I would love to see this show mock that trapped in the holodeck trope. But it didn't. It took it seriously. And that's a very missed opportunity, and it kind of annoys me. Because I think the show has done that a lot, where it takes typical tropes of Star Trek and it mocks them. It brings them up, but in order to, like, do meta commentary on it, to be like, see how ridiculous this is. Like Mariner's comments about, oh, we're traveling in space in a starship and we're getting killed by spears, kind of making fun of the original series. Or my personal favorite is when the dude was saying sensors and someone actually called him out. Are you trying to say sensors? Like shit like that, where it does like meta commentary, where it brings up particular like tropes that are silly, but it mocks them. Where here, it doesn't do that. It doesn't mock. I mean, you could say it mocks it in a bit because it's about a talking badge going, I mean, but I think they could have done more. I think because there was no meta commentary about how this was a tired, overused trope that is bad writing, that writers, just fall back to the same thing. Like, they could have, for example, had Rutherford said, it's kind of funny how this is a recreation thing, yet this constantly tries to kill people and it ends up murdering people. They should look into that. Like, they could have some line like that, or even make the plot more reflective of that, which that would be the kind of meta comedy I think the show does the best. Whereas is... I mean, other than the fact it's a silly... I mean, you could give it some leeway because it's a silly talking badge trying to kill people. But as is, it is the trope. It's not making fun of the trope. It's not parodying the trope. It's not mocking the trope. It is the trope. And that bothered me. Because I think the show could have done a much better job, because that's the whole point of the show, is to bring up these tropes, to mock them and point them out and make fun of them, and that's where the show really excels. And I feel this was a really missed opportunity. Instead of doing that, they just did the trope, which sucks, because I hate that trope. Anyway, and the whole thing about, you're my father or whatever, and then the badgie at the end was like, I want to help you, blah blah blah. Now, here's another thing I didn't like about the subplot. They're really ramping up that romance angle between Tendi and Rutherford, and I was hoping they wouldn't do that, but I think those hopes were pretty in vain. It's pretty kind of obvious earlier on, but now they're really making it super obvious. They're really ramping it up. He calls her cute. They had that cute moment where their boots stuck together, and like, I'm stuck, and it's obvious there's something between them, which I'm just like, I mean, at the very least, you could have intermingled them with the other plot with Born and Mariner before you put them together, but whatever. I mean, they're always off in their subplots all the time, but anyway. Yeah, I'm not very keen on this romance thing, even though, like, the characters kind of would be a nice couple. It's just, it's kind of a trope without mocking it. It's kind of a bit cliche. But yeah, I do like, again, they have the reference lines, and I like the reference line when they bring up, the holodecks isn't, when they say it's for training, it's not just for, they bring up a whole lot of shit, like Sherlock Holmes, and Socrates, and Albert Einstein, and Stephen Hawking, and they mentioned Robin Hood, but that's actually, I'm not saying the writer got this wrong, I think they knew it, but they're being a bit cheeky there, because Robin Hood in TNG wasn't the holodeck, it was Q. And they dropped Q, his name, a lot in this episode too. And that's funny because All right, I'll give a quite spoiler. There's this interview with Star Trek Day in a new trailer. So anyone who's like super sensitive to any information could skip ahead like 30 seconds or a minute. But anyone who's watched trailers or seen interviews or whatever know this is the case. So starting now. So Q is going to be in Lower Decks. There was a little trailer that showed a little Q. John Delancey is going to voice him, and the fact that they kept name dropping him in this episode made me think, oh my god, is this the episode he's going to appear? But it's not. Because I assume it's just going to be a slight cameo, that he's not going to be like a main character or anything like that. I mean, maybe he'll appear for like 5 minutes, maybe it'll just be one line, I don't know, but I think it's going to be just a minor, like, and that's what they said, it was just going to be a minor role. So the fact they kept dropping his name, I thought he was going to show up and, and be like, no, it wasn't me who did it, and stabbed it away, because the what's-his-face, the frizzy-haired dude, I can't recall his name at the moment, he kept trying to blame it on Q. That's funny. Anyway, so getting into that main plot, I think it's fair to call this the A plot, which it always is with Bulmer and Mariner, or at least Mariner. Here's something that I did like this. I thought, again, I like the structure of it and how it tied into this, what the senior officers are doing. I do like that opening scene where they're all making warp-ending noises and going like that. that was funny. And I thought it was a great character development between Bulmer and Mariner because, again, like last week's episode, which annoyed me because it was just doing the same every time. Bulmer's an idiot and Mariner's awesome, which I'm getting sick of. But here they make it more, and it's not sick of because it's cliche, because it's really flat and it's not that interesting. Whereas here they make it more interesting. They show how, and they explore how Mariner's disobedient, but they juxtapose that to another ensign who's disobedient, but in a bad way, and kind of saying that she's disobedient in a good way, and in fact how Bulmer and Mariner come together and they work together in this episode to overcome the stupid ensign. I think the coda at the end where Bulmer's like, oh, it's all good that you're disobedient and whatever, you're Starfleet at the core. She's like, yeah, so I stole the key for the captain's yacht, let's go take it for a spin, don't worry, I used your code to do it or whatever. Which is fun. It's a great moment. So I love that whole aspect of it. I think that worked extremely well. And just their whole character interactions and how they got along, how they worked together to overcome the issue, and how they were like, oh, when Mariner said to Bulmer, it's like, oh, you're not so annoying as I thought. And he's like, says, yeah, you're also not so annoying, because they do annoy each other. They find each other annoying in different ways, but they found common ground in this episode, which I think was great. Now let me talk about what I didn't like about this plot, and that's the again, my internet's kind of down at the moment, so that's why I'm blanking on people's names. I'm not looking it up. But the frizzy-haired dude, I didn't like this character. In fact, like, when he first appeared, and he was like this character we haven't seen before. Granted, there were only 6 episodes in, but still, he seemed to like pop out of nowhere because they're treating him like he's one of the gang when we've never seen him before, and that's always annoying. And he's doing everything perfect, and everyone loves him. Now, I thought when I saw this that they were gonna pull did what Rick and Morty did. It didn't even occur to me that the writer and the creative showrunner for this show worked on Rick and Morty when I thought about this. It wasn't like, oh, that's a Rick and Morty guy, so he's going to do a Rick and Morty thing. I didn't even think about that. I just thought oh, because it's so similar to this episode of Rick and Morty where this character we'd never seen before, I can't remember who it was called. The diehard fans of Rick and Morty will know off the top of their head. I'm not that huge of a fan, but there was some character who popped up out of nowhere as like Uncle Jim or whatever, and everyone loved him. And when they're like, "Oh, he's the great," and then Rick comes in, and shoots him in the head, and ends up being an alien. And then the whole part of the episode is that there's these aliens that show up and pretend like they plant fake memories and pretend that to be this character and make the main characters think that they had been there all along. Like, oh, don't you remember back, like, and they went ridiculous over the top with this, having like Frankenstein. Oh, don't you remember back in the day? And every time they had a flashback, there would be more of these, and these aliens were doing that to try to take over the world, basically. Like, they were trapped in the house and they wanted to get out of the house, so they would pretend to be these characters. And it was a really intelligent, really clever way to make fun of the TV trope of the character that pops up out of nowhere, which is a trope that's been around forever, mainly in sitcoms in the 80s and stuff, where they want to introduce a new character, so they have like Cousin Jimmy or someone pop up out of nowhere who all the main characters act like they've known all along, but of course they have is really contrived and alienates the audience. More recent example of that would be Nikki and Paolo in Lost, which was a lot of people very much against that. I honestly don't think it was that bad, but a lot of people really hate it. Now, so that's what I thought they were doing in this episode. When that dude popped up out of nowhere, I'm like, oh, they're doing a Rick and Morty thing where they're going to use that character to make fun of that trope. But again, they didn't. They actually just did the trope and didn't mock the fact that this character popped up out of nowhere, and yet people were acting like they knew him the whole time. And it's obvious this is a one-off character who's just going to be in this one episode, which they make clear at the end. So that really annoyed me. That they were actually, again, like this kind of like the holodeck thing, and this is a perfect opportunity for them to mock this trope, but instead of mocking the trope, to actually do the trope. Now, again, you could argue, well, it turns out this guy wasn't so perfect because he's going around doing everything perfect. This is the whole trope of the character who pops up out of nowhere. Not only do they pop up out of nowhere and everyone acts like they knew them the whole time, but also they're lovable and everyone loves them. It's also a part of how the trope goes. And this is how he was fitting that trope perfectly, because he was being too nice. He was like, oh, I'll stay behind and do all the work so you can do your dance, go to your choo-choo dance. And that when the senior officer, the cat doctor lady, had Mariner accidentally knocked nachos into her face and she was all pissed off, he came by, calmed her down. It's like, here you go. And like, he was being the perfect character trope. But they undid that trope by having it be like that he was just a really shitty innocent, and that he ended up causing all the main issues in the episode. But to me, that's not good enough, because it doesn't change the fact that he was sincerely being nice by offering to do that work and by like helping out the cat doctor. Like, it wasn't like he had ill intentions for that. He was doing that he was a nice guy. It's just apparently on top of that, when things came down to it, he was a bit of an asshole and was willing to make things even worse just to keep himself out of trouble. And again, none of that addresses the trope that this character just popped out of nowhere, and the characters are all acting like they know him. So again, I feel like instead of mocking the trope, they just did the trope and act like it was fine. So that's another thing that annoyed me. Now, I did like the ending of the episode where their solution to get rid of this guy is Mariner like told Ransom and the senior officers that he saved the day, and so he got promoted, and he got promoted upwards. And then I love how they flashed to 6 days later. It's like, I got fired because they knew he would, because he's useless. That was clever, and it's kind of as similar to how Mariner got promoted to a senior officer, and that was the worst thing in the world for her. So it's showing again how she thinks being promoted is not like a good thing. Like, Bulmer was really jealous of him at first. Like, he's going to the Titan, that's where I wanted to go. Now, Titan is also, that's a really good Easter egg for you there as well, because that is, of course, Riker's ship. This show, they have confirmed, takes place shortly after Nemesis, so this would be shortly after Riker took command of the Titan. And I found that really interesting. I kind of drew my own conclusions, because it kind of reminded me of how Riker treated Barclay, because he felt like, in the episode Hollow Pursuits, because he felt like Barclay didn't deserve to get transferred to his ship, the Enterprise, because only great officers should be there. She was like, well, if you can't hack it here, I'm going to fire you. It was Picard that sort of had to talk him out of it. It's like, no, let's work with him now. So I kind of feel like that was kind of the intention, where Riker's the captain of Titan, so if he has that officer, the frizzy-haired dude, show up and he's useless, he's just going to fire him. He's just going to be like, you don't deserve to be on this ship. and apparently he did something really reckless and stupid. I was really hoping for Jonathan Frakes cameo, because he constantly pops up on these he directs some of these newer tracks, and all he had to do is would go into like a booth and for like a few minutes and say one line of dialogue. But I guess they would have to pay him a boatload of money just to do that, and they weren't willing to do that. It's probably had more to do with it. But I was hoping for that Jonathan Frakes cameo, but whatever. They didn't mention him directly, but they kind of did mention the ship, the Titan, and they're letting the fans draw their own conclusions that that's Riker's ship. But anyway, so I thought that was cool. So my rating for this episode, whatever the hell it's called, I lost my thing. Anyway, my rating for episode 6 of season 1 of Lower Decks, out of 10, I'm going to give this, I'm going to give it a 7. I was tempted to give this an 8, because I enjoyed this episode a lot. I think the humor worked, and I think, as I said, I like the structure, the way they use the senior officers as opposed to lower deckers. But then I had to bring it down to a 7. It's a high 7, but I had to bring it down from an 8 to a 7 because of the holodeck trope, because of the new character trope, and because they're doing Tendi and Rutherford side plot again, which is just enough. And so I did have too many issues for this episode to give it an 8, but I still really enjoyed it. I still think it was one of the better ones, probably my second favorite of the season so far, if I'm being honest. But anyway, that's it for my review of Star Trek Lower Decks Season 1, Episode 6. Be sure to check out my channel every week as I review all the new episodes of Lower Decks, and also check out my channel as I cover many other shows like The Boys, The Expanse, other Star Trek shows, BoJack Horseman, and more, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.